Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. The number one thing holding women back is this: we don't speak up, and that's why we're missing opportunities. Now, that might be a little provocative for some of you. You might be saying, well, but I speak up. Well, I get there is always an exception. But I was recently interviewed on Donald Miller's podcast of Business Made Simple and Story Brand. And that is going to be coming out sometime in hopefully September of this year. But in our conversation, it helped me to get more clarity on what I'm passionate about and what is the one problem that I solve. And it is simply that: to help women speak up and get more opportunities, and dare I say, surpass men in the executive C-suite. My goal today is to give you 3 of my best tips for how to speak up, specifically with very tangible, practical ways that you can do that. The first one is to speak first. The second one is to say, here's my vote. And the third one is, drum roll, please, make a direct versus a passive ask. Let me walk through each of these. The first one is to speak first. And what I mean by this is, think about the last time you were in a meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, and somebody starts and says, so who wants to go first? Or a lot of times they don't even say that. It's usually something like, who has something that they'd like to share? Or who wants to kick us off? Or it might just simply be, here's our agenda for the meeting. Who has ideas? Or something to the tune of that. There's often this awkward silence where nobody wants to go first. Capitalize on that awkward silence and go first. There's a number of benefits to this. First of all, because you're the first one, you show the initiative and you show leadership. But also, when you do that, first of all, you've got the first idea out there. You don't have to worry that 5 people later, you're going to have to repeat something that somebody said or reiterate or pile on. And I don't mean that in a negative way. That sounds really negative. I just mean you're not going to have to be the person that says, oh, I agree with so-and-so or ditto. You come with your own creative idea, or just simply you start the ideas off. And that in and of itself will make you come across as a leader. And you know what else is one of the best benefits for some of us? You don't have to sit there and worry while other people are talking. What am I going to say? What am I going to say? Oh, that person already said that. That person already said that. You don't have to do it. Once you're done, then you're done. That's why going first is always great. And if we think about the wonderful Mel Robbins, who talks about the 5-second rule, she has that book, The 5-Second Rule, as well as High Five Habit. But what I love that she talks about in the 5-second rule is taking action basically within 5 seconds. Otherwise, we're less inclined to do anything. And oftentimes, if we don't do it within 5 seconds, we won't do it at all. So that would be my first tip, is to always speak first. Now, a little more on this. I do this quite a bit. And as I have said more about this to other people, I've got to practice what I preach too. And I'll tell you, it's been a really interesting experiment, because I am amazed at how many people don't start off with the meeting. And there is that, especially when we're on virtual Zoom, it's that weird, awkward pause. And it's usually more than a second where nobody's saying anything. And then sometimes the lead person has to even say, all right, anybody? So you want to just jump in and go first. Okay, let's talk about the second one, which was, see, the first one was speak first. The second one is, here's my vote. And let me talk about this a little bit. I personally love this tip, because when I was finding my voice and getting more comfortable speaking up, even if my idea was unpopular, I found this to be really helpful, because it felt very diplomatic to me. It felt very much like, hey, I'm not just jumping in with well, I think it doesn't really matter if you jump in with an idea. But for whatever reason, I had felt, maybe it's my Minnesota upbringing, but where you accommodate everybody else, I felt like it would be too forceful to just jump in saying an idea. But more importantly, let me back up for a minute. Let me tell you what I used to do. And I got great feedback from my previous boss on this. What I used to do is I would come to the table with all of the research I had done or the different people that I had talked to and come together, whatever the context was. I would essentially come and say, here's everything and all the information that we need to make a decision. What do you all think? And I rarely said what I thought. I was the one that would be worried about saying the right thing, be worried about being judged. And what I would end up doing is giving some answer very similar to what I thought my boss wanted to hear or what the majority of people said. And there's so many problems with that. I felt trapped by myself because I wasn't being free to be fully expressing myself and my opinions. And it's not as if, I had, if I had a really strong opinion about something, I would sometimes say it. But the truth is, if I'm really being honest with myself, most of the time I would just go with the majority. And I'm not proud of that, but I want you to know that because that is what I really have overcome over the years. And so I would do that. And my boss actually challenged me one day and she said, "You know what? I want to know what you think. You always come with all these ideas and ask us, but what do you think?" And my jaw kind of dropped because I thought, uh, I wasn't prepared for that. Now I'm prepared for that. And I found by now what I started doing when I was in a corporate role and what I consult people on now is to once again go first and this time say, here's my vote. You could also say, here's what I think. What happens in that phrase, in each of those phrases, is that it tees up what you're about to say and it creates focus as well. When you say, here's my vote, suddenly people realize, oh, okay, that's Karen's vote. I'm not saying here's the right thing to do, here's the best thing to do. I'm simply saying, here's my vote. Here's how I would weigh in. That's another thing you could say. Here's how I would weigh in. And the more you can get comfortable saying this, that will help you to speak up in general. But that is a great way that's, again, diplomatic. It's also easy on the ears if that makes you feel more comfortable while you're finding your voice. I certainly don't want anybody to feel coddled or to walk on eggshells or to try to feel like you have to show up in a certain way in meetings all the time. I'm just simply saying, as you're experimenting with speaking up and being true to yourself and not waiting for permission to speak, here's my vote is a really great place to start. All right. Our third one is to make a direct versus passive ask. And let me tell you about my story where I missed an opportunity and wasted probably 8 months of my life. I was asked to be on the leadership team at a past company, and I was very excited to be a part of this, to be asked. I was at the time a senior manager, and I had been a senior manager for many years. Everybody in the leadership team was director or above. So I made a passive ask, which I actually thought was a direct ask, which is another thing that's interesting about being aware of something. And I am now much more aware of it, and I want you to be aware of it too. What I said was, and my boss was a little bit distracted. She was at her computer and we were in a conference room and I was walking out and I said, "Hey, I want to know a little bit more about what this means. I'm so honored to be part of this team. And what I want to ask you is, everybody else is a director or above. And I really am wondering what that means for me. So can we look?" And she said, "Oh, yeah. We'll have to look at that at some point." Well, then I heard nothing months later, and I was on the leadership team at that point, contributing 100%. And then I brought it up with another C-suite leader in the team who had some HR responsibilities, talked to him about the title, and he said, "Well, there's a lot of factors that we need to consider." It was all this kind of HR hubbub talk. No offense to my HR friends out there. That's my background too. But bottom line, I get to my review 8 months later, and I think I'm going to be promoted. And after the review, which was a very positive review, my boss looked at me because she could sense something was off, and she goes, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, I actually thought that, whatever happened with the director position." And she said, "What?" She didn't even remember the conversation. Oh my gosh. I said, "What?" This whole time I'm hoping that she's going to recognize the great work I've been doing and remember that conversation. And all of this to say, we both chuckled at that. And then I said, "Here's what I would have done differently. And what I would recommend to any of you listening is ask for what you want directly." I should have said, if I could do it over, I should have said, "I have a goal to be director or above, and my next step would be director. So I want to get there, and I would want to know what that looks like. Can you help me get there? What do I need to do? What can you help me with? And I'd like to set up a timeline for when we can revisit this." Now, just notice how much clearer that is. There's no hemming and hawing and wondering, like, "Oh, will I get it? Will I not?" It goes back to what Brene Brown says so beautifully: clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And that's the same thing for us. We have got to be clear so that we don't waste time and miss opportunities, which is what I did. So, I want to revisit what we discussed today, which is always speak first, number one. Number two is say, "Here's my vote," when you want to insert your opinion on something. And number three, make sure that you make a direct versus passive ask. I'm going to end with the story that I noticed happens a lot in the coaching that I've done related to the last point about the direct versus passive asks. I've coached thousands of people. And I only say that because I'm amazed at how often this happens where people imply versus direct. And this is men and women, by the way. So for many years, I would coach people, or specifically, I would record people doing a 1 minute pitch to someone else, and they would make their what do you call it? Not quest, but their direction was to ask the person, once they did their pitch, for a direct action step. So, for example, I would coach them to say, when they've pitched their product or service, to say, "Would you like to buy it? Would you like to have me send you a proposal?" Or something like that. A very specific ask. And do you know that the majority of people would say things like, "If you're interested, here's my number." Or, "If you'd like to learn more, here's the link that you can go to." Now, in certain contexts, that could be relevant, but my suggestion is to make that direct ask. And here's the kicker: more often than not, right before I would play those videos back, I would ask the person, "Do you think you made a direct ask?" And most of the time they would say, "Oh, yeah, totally." And then we would listen to it. And then they would go, "Oh, I see what you mean. I implied it only. I said something like, 'If you're interested,' or 'if you'd like.'" That is not a direct ask. And most of the time, the reason why we don't want to do this is because, first of all, we're not socially trained to do it. And we feel this vulnerable feeling because it is vulnerable to make a direct ask when you don't know if the answer is going to be yes. And we're all afraid of rejection at our core. So it makes sense from a human perspective. But what's going to get us results is asking directly. So make sure that you ask directly. On that note, I will leave you. I want to encourage you to keep speaking up. Stop holding back. Speak up so that you can show your incredible brilliance as the amazing and unstoppable leader that you are, so you can stand out with unshakable confidence. That's what it's all about. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.